Hi, welcome to Iron Health Talk with Dr. Akram. I am Akram. In this program, we'll be talking about all kinds of different health issues with different experts in the field. But today, we're going to talk about psychology of culture. So sit down and enjoy your time with us. Thinking pattern and expression changes from culture to culture. Some cultures are open, some are not much. The psychology of culture is very interesting and very important, especially when you live in a society like UK where it's multicultural. The Asian culture is one of the oldest in the world, and of course the Hindu religion is the oldest practiced religion in the world from 5000 BCE. The earliest Buddhist writings are preserved in a three-part collection called Tipitaka. The first part, Sutta Pitaka, contains a series of disclosure about psychology. According to Lord Buddha, one's mind can be trained, cured, and cultivated. Doctors knew about this thousands of years ago. They knew that body and mind are not same. And even Muslim scholars, Avicenna from 980 1030, a Persian polymath who wrote in his canon of medicine, Al-Quran fi il-Tab, description and treatment for insomnia, mania, vertigo, paralysis, depression, even for male sexual dysfunction. But along the time, we have forgotten, we don't give much importance for psychological problems. Especially in the Asian culture, it became a taboo. And even we want to be a man, just man it, and you don't want to say about it. And this program, especially for that, we are going to discuss what's wrong in our culture, how can we improve it, and how can we go ahead, especially looking after the people who's got problems in their head which they can't explain. So for that, please welcome our special guest on the show, Damini Larjan, who is a PhD candidate in psychology at the University of Hertfordshire, who specialized in mental health stigma in South Asian community and psychosis research. Damini.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you in the show.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Excellent. How is your day?
Not too bad, honestly.
Lovely. Okay, let's talk about you and why have you got this interest in the psychology of Asian communities? That's your PhD.
So my interest in psychology, specifically in South Asian culture, stemmed with my personal experience. So my cousin brother he actually has a learning disability, and how people viewed him was very different. To be very honest, he is treated like just any other child in our house. So we give him the same amount of love as myself and my cousin sister get. So he's treated exactly like us. But the people outside of our family, they look at him very differently, which is very sad. And we have a 4-year gap, but growing up, I've always seen and I've always heard people say, well, go to this temple, go to that temple, do this ritual and do that ritual, it would help. And I think at that very early age, I realized that that's not going to help my brother at all, because this is probably something biological, or that's probably what I understood at that age. But having said that, none of those rituals really worked. Or what helped my brother over time was a bit of love and a bit of patience. And here we are, and that's what grew my interest.
That's very interesting. Why is that? Like, if somebody had let's say in our community, somebody had another disease, let's call blood pressure, diabetes, or any other health issues, it's not taken as a stigma. Why is this mental health?
Okay, so the answer is really simple. Because diabetes and blood pressure has biological cues, however, psychological issues do not have any biological cues. They merely stem out of social experiences. Of course, there are biological aspects to psychological disorders. You have it at a neurological level or a neurochemical level. So when I'm talking about neurological level, it merely translates to brain damages and so on. When I'm talking about a neurochemical level, it's the hormonal fluctuations that causes disorders such as depression, schizophrenia, and so on. So people, do not see that aspect of health and do not take it very seriously. Interestingly, the World Health Organization has explicitly mentioned that for someone to be in good health, mental health is one of the most important factors aside to physical health. So it's a bit ironical in some senses that people do not pay much attention to their mental health and think of it as a phase of life when it merely isn't a phase of life. It's probably even stemmed from something biological.
Great. Anyway, mental health is a big spectrum.
Yeah.
We're going to talk certain about it. This is a live program, so you can call us 0203 515 5788 if you have any questions, or you can always write to us on our health talk at iontv.co.uk or on our Facebook link, Ion Health Talk with Dr. Akram, or YouTube or Instagram. But for the time being, let's talk more about this. Lovely. Why people are reluctant to seek help, especially in the Asian community? This is a bit...
It's highly relevant in the Asian community, specifically that question. And the reason why we have this issue is merely because we are a community who care a lot about what others think of us. We are a cohesive group. We're not an individualistic culture group like the Western cultures. So what happens to me, my family is accountable to that. So it's like if I have a diagnosis for something, my family suffers. My family is a part of that diagnosis, unfortunately. And it taints the image of your family, which is a bit sad. That's how our culture operates. So having said that, the fact that a diagnosis could taint your reputation in the society is what creates that reluctancy of going and seeking help. It's all about what others would think about me, what others would think about my son, what others would think about our family. They are so concerned about the third person's validation, which is just not fair.
So they are more concerned about this third person, and the closest person suffers because of this, isn't it?
Correct. That's right. And as a result, most mental health diagnoses in the Asian community just goes unnoticed. And as a result of which, the person who is suffering clearly suffers even more, and sometimes it eventually leads to the loss of a loved one.
Yeah. So I keep thinking, is it that they can't see that physical pain in someone?
No.
Is that the reason they don't give that much importance? If you had pain somewhere, the mothers wouldn't wait with you. They will take you to the hospital and they won't get it treated. But when it's a psychological problem, it is a pain in a different way.
It's an emotional pain, right?
Yeah.
It's not seen. It can only be felt. So if it's physical, it would be seen. You would, literally, if you got a scab, you would just put a plaster and let that heal. But this is a deep-seated wound that you can't see, you can't touch. So how do you heal that is the question.
Okay, let's compare. You are living here in UK and you are studying in the UK, and you are seeing the both different communities here, right?
Yeah.
What do you see in the UK, the local community, and what is the difference between the Asian community?
frankly speaking, there is a huge difference, because if you see the Western culture, they are more open about talking about their feelings, whereas the South Asians are not really open in terms of that. We tend to bottle up our emotions. It's all about being strong, being resilient. If you will, if you had to go and tell your mom that, oh, I'm feeling a bit low, the words you would hear is, be strong. You can't be strong all the time. That's not how it works.
So is that the same thing as a be a man?
Be a man, yeah. And that's what most South Asian men hear. And unfortunately, that's not the right thing to say. I don't think being a man is linked with strength. I think men are also susceptible to mental health issues. So gender is not a barrier to, having a mental health issue or
So
feeling
on
emotionally
this
low.
aspect, what do you find in your research?
Well, when I was researching about mental health stigma, we clearly understood that there is a lack of understanding of mental health. And that is purely stemmed from the fact that there is no word in the languages that we speak in Asia that specifically addresses mental health problems. You don't have a specific terminology for depression. You don't have a specific terminology for psychosis or schizophrenia.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything is rooted to emotions, feeling covered. And that's it. There's no specific word to it. And because everything is related to emotions, what most of them do is they go and rationalize that feeling as a test of God. And that is the most common thing that happens in the
test
South
of
Asia.
God.
Yeah.
Right. How come the South Asian culture is one of the oldest cultures, especially as I said earlier, the Hindu religion is 5,000 years before Christ, and the Buddhism came roughly about 500 years before before Christ. And these are the oldest religion, and these societies which been living there, they lost this touch of these psychological problems. How come they missed it, or we didn't or it didn't carry forward?
It's not about missing it or not carrying forward. Although the scholars may have written about it, like you have the Buddhist scholars who have written about this, Buddhism clearly has a lot of emphasis on mental health.
Buddhism, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It has.
Hinduism, you may consider it to be a religion, but it's really not. It's like an art of living sort of a feature. So everything has some sort of a scientific element to it. But having said that, there's a very important factor that we've got to understand is our means of communication is language. So if the language does not have a specific terminology to talk about emotions like feeling blue, feeling depressed, upset, then what can you do?
Damini, thank you very much. It's time for a quick break. Anyway, if anyone joined today, we are talking about psychology of cultures. And is in our studio is Miss Damini Lalchand is here. She is psychology. She's doing a PhD in psychology. But we'll see you after a short break. Until then, look after yourself. Hi, welcome back. It's Iron Health Talk with Dr. Akram. Today we're talking about psychology of cultures. Why in Asian culture the psychological problems or psychiatric problems is given a small priority. In our studio we have a PhD candidate, Damini Lalchand. Damini, thank you very much for being with us. Again, okay, let's talk about teenagers, working adults, soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
How they can express their feelings.
When you're asking that question, what do you mean specifically? Because there would be a plethora of answers that I could give you.
Yeah, it's the psychological problems are there, isn't it? And we try to keep it to ourselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's what I mean. Like, how can a parent identify from a teenager?
I think the first cue would always be if the child or the teenager is a bit distant and aloof, in the sense that they're not able to cope with their normal day-to-day activities, not able to come and, talk to their family openly. But I think that's very common with those who are teenagers. They generally do not talk much to their parents.
Yeah, but these are changes, hormonal changes
these
in the
are
teenage
associated
years.
with hormonal changes.
Yeah.
And interestingly, there is a lot of research that suggests that most teenagers are at the brinks of mental health issues because of the hormonal changes, indeed. And it's also associated to the fact where parents say, well, you should stop behaving like a child and behave more or less like a grown-up. And when they do behave like a grown-up, they expect you to behave as a child. So it's like there's a sort of pressure as to how do I behave for my age. So there is that given pressure on that end.
Yeah.
But also a lot of teenagers, and specifically teenage girls, they suffer from body image issues.
Right.
And that's because their body is going through changes with the growth of breasts and change in their physical structure, which they sort of find it to be weird in some senses, or when they try to have a potential idealistic figure that they'd like to be, and they assume that, well, I'm not going to be this way, I'm not worthy. So they do suffer from a huge and a great deal of body image issues, specifically teenage girls. And the common issues that you see with teenage girls is always anorexia, bulimia, so mostly eating disorders. That's common in teenagers. However, there are some teenagers who do suffer from depression due to issues like bullying from school or so on. So there are things that teenagers do suffer. Now, in case if a teenager has been sexually abused, that really affects the teenager at a greater deal, because they would then later down the line they would have issues in building relationships with one another in their adulthood that could put them in the brink of PTSD at some point if they are not resilient enough, or it could lead to a diagnosis of psychosis, or going down the line they could have traits of psychosis that could emerge in their personality. And when I say traits of psychosis in their personality, I'm merely basing this comment on the facets that mental health issues lie in a spectrum. So
True.
You have to view it as a bell curve, wherein one end of the population is in one extreme and the other is at the another extreme, on the highest ends. So the highest ends would probably involve those in the institution. So we all come in the middle of that bell. So you could be on the higher extremes of the bell and to the lower extremes, but whatever is in the middle is normally considered normal. But the question that we as psychologists or we as psychology researchers always think is that what is normal? And we don't know. And when you're talking about cultures, and specifically with the South Asian culture, and you will always question that what is normal. And the reason why you have that question is because all these theories in psychology was devised in the 18th, 19th century, things like that. So all the the influx of migrants from the Asian cultures probably came after the Second World War. So all these theories were formulated before the Second World War. So they didn't have access to the population to test all these major theories that we still use in psychology, and some of which is not even relevant in the South Asian culture. It has to be tweaked. And interestingly, when I was working at a mental health institute for destitute women in India, I realized a lot of the clinicians were tweaking the therapies to make it culturally appropriate
Right.
for it to work. And the reason why they did that is, firstly, the patients were not educated. Secondly, they didn't know English. So, of course, all of these theories were formulated in English. Now, if you were to translate things into Hindi, Bangla, or even to Tamil or so on, somehow these words, they lose its meaning in the translation. So it doesn't really make sense, or it doesn't really work. So it always questions the effectivity of the treatment in some senses again.
It's a problem for working adults as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think for working adults, but interestingly, in this country, a lot of the larger institutions have invested a great deal on mental health, so which is a good thing. But it boils down to a bigger question: what about the medium firms?
Yeah.
I mean, they do give a sick leave for a very shorter period of time, but they also question the value of that employee and how much they give into that company. So they probably grant those leaves on those basis, maybe an additional day or two, take some time off, rest, come back. But I don't think that's enough.
Like, what do you think? Well, how can they report these problems? Because there will be a lot of people watching this program, and if they have these issues, how can they go to the next level to report to someone, parents, or what kind of level you expect in your?
I think it depends on the setting you're placed in. So now, say if you were a working adult, you work for a major corporation, you can always talk. You always have a psychologist on site at your workplace. So mental health is accessible in this country, thankfully. That's a good thing, and it's free. If you're in a university setup, you have your well-beings team, and you can always easily get an appointment to talk to a psychologist or a counselor. Similarly, the same benefits are available at schools. But say if you are not in any of these three setups, then it's just down to calling your GP, talking about it, and they would hook you through to a psychologist if needed.
That's a really important point, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I think people should be aware of the organizations that do help for mental health, specifically in this country, like Samaritans, Mind. So reaching out to them would also be a good option.
Right. There must be lots in the internet as well, isn't there? Websites.
Plenty, like Sane Line. I think that's the one that has a lot of online resources. But usually, I think for a common man to understand about mental health, the best touch point is always going to be mind, because the words are quite simplified out there, so someone can understand or get an insight into mental health. Or NHS has the best resources about mental health.
Of course, yeah. What kind of signs and symptoms they expect? It is a big variety. What are the common things you should look for?
You know, if I pick up the DSM as somebody who has practically 2 degrees in psychology, I can probably diagnose myself with almost everything in it, honestly. So that's one issue there.
1 minute. There's a caller there. That's good. Hello, hi.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. What's your name, sir?
My name is Mr. Uddin. I want to, Bengali. Apni Bengali nahi?
You can ask our studio. They know Bengali, and they will translate it for me. You know Bengali? No. The studio will translate and they will come back to me. All right? Okay, until they translate, let's go ahead. Yeah, signs and symptoms.
So when you're talking about the signs and symptoms, as I said, if I take the DSM, if I were to pick it up, I could diagnose myself with almost anything and everything, because certain cues of mental health is prevalent to aspects of our normal personality too. But I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is if you simply cannot function on a day-to-day basis and you're finding it really tough to carry on with your normal life, I think it is important to take that as the biggest sign and seek help.
Right, yeah.
Like, feeling sad for a day is fine, but feeling sad for a week or even more, that's just not
feeling
the way
sad.
to go. Yeah, that's one. I'm trying to simplify this for our audience. Of course, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritties and the technical factors.
Of course.
Like if you cannot carry on with your normal day-to-day activities, such as getting up from the bed for a prolonged period, that's a major takeaway. If you're not caring about your personal hygiene, which is something a lot of people with depression, they forget. They
forget it. They don't. It's not that they don't want to do it.
They forget it because they are so engrossed in their emotions of feeling sad that they don't want to get up from bed or take a shower. So those are the things. Like say if we were talking about OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. If you were a person who had to go and check the locks constantly, like 30, 40 times in one go, then it's a huge concern, right? If you keep washing your hands constantly, and at this moment, yes, you have to wash your hands. But if it is very dysfunctional to the way that you're so scared to come outside and not be able to function, then yeah, that's of course a big concern there.
That's quite interesting. We're going to talk more about treatment a bit later. And let's go again. I think what should parents, as a parent, what should they look in their children, the growing children? They can pick up these things early, isn't it?
They can, definitely. And I think the first thing parents should take away is that try and create a safer space for your children to be able to confide into you. I think it's very important for parents to act more as your child's friend and not as a parent most of the time. Because I think you have a safer space at home. Of course, you can be yourself at home. So it's best that the parents have to provide that safe space and say, well, I'm not judging you. I'm here for you. I'm here to look after you. And the thing with South Asian parents is that that's what they feel in their heart. But what they say is very different, you know.
Different.
I think most South Asian parents resort to yelling at their children, and it is a bit disappointing. And I think children do misinterpret that shouting, and they think, well, my parent thinks I'm not valuable, or I'm not worthy of not doing well. But I think when you grow up over time, you'll realize that it was their way of showing their love to you.
Exactly, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, but a child will not understand that, right?
Damini, we'll talk a bit more, but until then we need to go for a quick short break. But anyway, if anyone joined today, we're talking about psychology of culture. This why is it completely different or slightly different in the Asian culture compared to the place where we live in England. But until we talk a bit more afterwards, and until then, going to go for a short break. Hi, welcome back to Eye and Health Talk with Dr. Akram. Today we are talking about psychology of culture. In our program here, our specialist, as a special guest, Domini Larchen, who is a PhD candidate in psychology at the University of Hertfordshire. Domini, we were talking about South Asian parents. Are they, the children and the parents, are they living in two different cultures?
Absolutely, 100%. So, if the child was born here, raised here, they are considered a second generation migrant, whilst the parent is considered a first generation migrant. So, for the parent, firstly, there is a great deal of assimilation that happens. That means imbibing or taking in aspects of what the British culture has for them to offer to be able to thrive in this culture, but also holding on to aspects from their home culture. And a lot of first generation migrants, they love to hold on to their first culture, and I don't blame them purely because of the fact that they like to take a piece of home with them wherever they are.
So are you trying to say that they live here, but their
mind
is
and heart is back home.
somewhere back there?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of us. But they do very well acculturate, and this poses some sort of a benefit for first generation migrants. From some research, this is what we have understood. It gives them the benefit of being healthier. So you generally tend to have lower reports of mental health issues in first generation migrants. That's the trend we have seen across a lot of research, and I'm hoping to see that in my research when I go forward experimenting and analyzing the data, or I hope to see something different. But with the second generation, with the children who are born here, it's a different story altogether, because they are originally from another culture, but they are born into this culture, into the culture that's completely different to the Eastern culture back home. So there's always the conflict of, am I too brown to be white, or am I too white to be brown? That is the most common thing that you hear amongst a lot of South Asian children who are born in the UK or in other Western countries. So they almost feel like they are a bit aloof and distant from their culture, but also feel highly connected to their culture. They almost feel like two different people at home and at work.
At work.
Yeah. And it's very taxing for them.
That is a good point you brought. In your research, have you found anywhere what can they do for this?
Well, it's not.
It's a tough thing. It's more personal.
It's more personal. Now, when I was doing some of my lit review, I understood that if you are very distant from your culture, it puts you on the brinks of seeking more help, things like that. The research out there is vast and varied. There's always controversies, so it's a question about who reacts to certain situations and how. So it's an individualistic answer. So I can't answer for like around 1 million people living in this country who belong to the Asian culture. Over 1 million.
And comparatively, do you see more South Asian kids being affected by psychological problems compared to the locals, or is it similar?
If you're talking about the second generation.
Second generation, actually. Yeah.
Second generation, those who are born here, yes, indeed, they do mimic aspects of the native group out here. So they do go and seek help, but again, there's the caveat. Because you come from the South Asian culture, there is a prejudice in terms of seeking help. It stops them from going and seeking help. And then when you do seek help, because most of the therapists are not from BME backgrounds, they feel like their psychologists do not understand them. And most psychiatrists are from Asian backgrounds.
Most psychiatrists are from Asian backgrounds.
Because that requires you to go to medical school.
Exactly. But psychologists
don't go to medical school.
Okay. Can you clarify here? But we know that there is a difference between psychiatrist and psychologist. What is the difference for this audience?
So a psychiatrist has a formal medical training and can prescribe drugs, and they play a crucial and a vital part in your drug management aspect for your diagnosis. However, the psychologist also makes your diagnosis, and when I am talking about psychologists, there are a plethora of psychologists, and psychology is a diverse field of its own. So you've got educational psychologists, business psychologists, research psychologists, health psychologists, and clinical psychologists. So it's the clinical psychologist who makes the call for your diagnosis. So they refer you for treatments.
So these psychologists are the people who identify these things. They are the people who pick up from the community, and they assess them. Then they send it to different directions.
Yeah, they identify the disorder. Even sometimes your GP can identify and send you through to the clinician. Yeah. But the clinical psychologist or a psychologist cannot give drugs because obviously they do not have a formal training in medicine.
Exactly. Oh, that's a good point. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about anxiety and depression. It's quite common, or is it not common?
Depression, interestingly, is regarded as the common cold of mental health issues. I think a lot of us get depressive episodes at times, and there are a good number of people who have a diagnosis of depression, who are on antidepressants, who seek help for depression. However, anxiety is also very common. So you have a lot of people who experience anxiety because of social situations, due to a phobia and so on. So anxiety is quite common, and so as for depression.
Okay, 1 second. Now I got the message from the caller.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyway, this is a very interesting question. The caller wanted to ask that he had coronavirus a few weeks back. Can he have vaccine? But anyway, this question is not for you.
It's not for me.
I think it's meant for my program anyways.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is a very good question, but I'm glad he brought this question forward. Our next week program is specially based on vaccine. And we're going to talk everything about vaccine. So please watch our program next week, and of course you can ask. Next week I'm bringing a professor in this aspect, in the vaccine area, so you can definitely ask that question. It's a bit difficult for me to say whether you can have your vaccine or not yet, but even though you had coronavirus, you can have vaccine, but you have to go through your GP at the moment. The GP is the first person to advise you. Like, of course, you might have other problems as well, other health problems. So it is best to go through the GP. But again, don't forget and be with us next week, and we'll talk more about the vaccine. Okay, let's go back to our program. Anyway, we talked about depression and anxiety, yeah?
Yeah.
Few symptoms, few signs and symptoms of depression. What are they? Like, what are the things they will feel?
Prolonged feelings of melancholia, which is feeling sad for a very prolonged duration, feeling distant and aloof, which is very synonymous with most diagnoses like psychosis and so on. But feeling distant and aloof, distancing yourself from family and friends, and not wanting to face the world, face reality. That's one of the issues out there.
But everybody has it time to time, isn't it, for a short period?
For short period, yes. For long periods,
for a day or two?
Not for a day or two. That's probably just feeling sad, maybe for something that has happened.
So that's normal, yeah?
That's okay. It's okay to have ups and downs in life.
Ups and downs in your life.
It's fine. But if it's for a very long time, if it's for over a month.
Over a month, that's the time you think about it,
You have to think of it. If it's really affecting your day-to-day living, of course you have to think about it. Of course that's where you have to go seek help.
That's the time you go and seek for help.
Yeah.
And
I'm not telling you it's 1 month, but it can even be 15 days. But if you feel that you are
It's
completely
affecting your day-to-day
drained.
life,
Yeah.
isn't it? Your work and your life,
Yeah. If you can't
your
process,
hygiene, yeah.
if you can't process, you can't sustain, then please seek
And
help.
this is a condition which is treatable.
Of course it is treatable. Of course it is manageable. It is treatable if you seek the help that you need and at the right time and on time.
And the treatment-wise, okay, is it always medications or is something else there?
Oh, it's not always medications. It is, of course, it depends on the case now. Every case is different.
Exactly.
So there are some cases that requires medication if the psychotherapies are not working, or
So
sometimes they work
what
in
is
a
the first
combination.
step? Like somebody comes with depression, how are you going to take those people with the treatment plan?
Generally, if you're going to access this through a counseling psychologist, you can go for a counseling session. So
So
that's
counseling
talking
session,
therapy.
yeah.
So talking therapy it is.
So most of the time when you talk out your problem, when you talk to someone, you
Yeah.
feel better.
Yeah, it's
It
like
goes off.
sharing your problems.
Yeah.
Like a problem is half shared or half
Yeah.
sorted. Like if you talk it out.
So that's the first step. You
Yeah.
talk to someone, yeah.
Yeah, you talk. So if you are seeking help from a counseling psychologist, you are getting into talking therapy. Then there's something called cognitive behavioral therapy. So where they identify the triggers and how to react to those triggers, because sometimes a trigger can influence your behavior and your thought process. So the CBT therapy sort of corrects that behavioral outcome and the thought patterns that can emerge in the presence of a trigger. So that is commonly used for anxiety, actually most mental health disorders. Then you've got behavioral therapies where they correct the maladaptive behaviors,
Behavioral therapy,
yeah,
okay.
to adaptive ones. So they correct behaviors that is not normal or not social, not acceptable, or it's affecting you in some senses. They correct it to
You
adaptive
got
ones.
1 minute, please go ahead quickly. And what are the
And
treatments?
then you have treatments that go hand in hand with the drugs. So they say that treatments that go hand in hand, like psychological and the drug intervention, has the best effects and best effectivity, but depends on the case. Sometimes you don't even need drugs.
You don't even need, and they don't have to take the drugs for lifelong, isn't it? It can be for short period.
Yeah, and most of them are usually tapered, and then you have management therapies.
Excellent. So this psychological problems can be treated as some other medical problems.
Basically, that's it.
Same, yeah?
That's it. It is a
Do you
medical
want to
issue.
say a quick message for a few seconds?
Please look after your mental health as much as you look after your physical health. And I know you are doing everything that you can to look after your physical health at this point, but it's also very much important to look after your mental health, because if you don't have good mental health, then you're not considered healthy in some senses too.
Damini, thank you very much. It's a
Thank you so
really
much.
fruitful session. We went through most of the stuff. I think this is for a lot of people. This been around their head. It's not been talked upon.
No, absolutely
So
not.
thank you very much.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
for all of you, thank you very much for being with this Iron Health Talk with Dr. Akram. Today we talked about psychology of different cultures. But if you have any question, you can always write to us on healthtalk@intv.co.uk, or you can write on a dedicated YouTube channel, Instagram, or Facebook. But next week we're going to talk about vaccine development and vaccine updates. There's a professor coming to our studio. So be with us, and until then, look after yourself. Thank you very much.